r/TrueOffMyChest. My son calls Uncle cheap at parties, now I see the abuse. Hashtag the gift. My son's voice cracked when he opened the box at my brother's birthday party last Saturday. It's okay, Mom, he whispered, holding up an action figure with one arm missing and a chunk taken out of its plastic torso. The paint was chipped so badly you couldn't tell what color it was supposed to be originally. I like it. He was lying. I could see it in his eyes, that same wounded look he gets when he thinks he's done something wrong, even though he hasn't. He was 8 years old and already learning to apologize for not being grateful enough for garbage. I forced a smile and squeezed his shoulder, but my jaw was clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. Across the room, my brother Derek was watching us with this expression that made my skin crawl, something between amusement and contempt. He had his arm around his own son, Marcus, who was showing off the latest gaming console that had just come out last month. $2,000, easy. Top of the line. You know how it is, Derek said loudly enough for everyone to hear, grinning at his wife. Kids are so easy to please. They'll play with anything, right? No one called him out. No one ever does. Derek's always been the golden child in our family, at least since Dad died 6 years ago. Good-looking, successful, generous with his time and money, or so everyone thought. The fun uncle who shows up with a smile and a story. The guy everyone wants at their party. But I was starting to see something else. Something rotten underneath all that charm. This wasn't the first time. Over the past year or so, I'd started to notice a pattern that made my stomach twist. Christmas before last, Derek gave my son a vintage action figure collection that turned out to be broken beyond repair. For his birthday last spring, it was a remote control car with a wheel that didn't turn. Last month at a family barbecue, it was candy that expired in 2019. Derek had actually laughed when my son discovered the expiration date, like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. And each single time, Derek's kids got something spectacular. Expensive. New. The kind of gifts that made other kids jealous and made my son's face fall into that expression of quiet devastation. I brought it up to my mom once, carefully, trying to frame it as a misunderstanding. Maybe Derek just has extra stuff lying around from his house? I'd suggested, trying to be generous. Trying to believe there was an innocent explanation. My mom had patted my hand and changed the subject. She does that a lot, avoids conflict, pretends everything is fine, even when it's burning down around us. After the party, in the car on the way home, I watched my son in the rearview mirror. He was holding that mutilated action figure like it might break further if he breathed on it wrong. His other hand was wrapped around the gift bag Derek had given him, mostly empty except for some tissue paper and a few pieces of that expired candy. Mom? His voice was small. Is there something wrong with me? My heart actually stopped. What? No, baby. Why would you ask that? Because Uncle Derek always gives me stuff that's broken. And he gives Marcus and Emma new stuff. So maybe. He trailed off, looking down at the mangled toy in his hands. Maybe I'm the kind of person who only gets broken stuff. I had to pull over. I sat there in the Whole Foods parking lot, both hands gripping the steering wheel, while my 8-year-old son, my brilliant, kind, thoughtful son, was quietly constructing a narrative where he deserved less. Where he was somehow fundamentally less worthy of care than his cousins. And his uncle was building that narrative brick by brick, gift by gift, with an audience of people who either couldn't see it or didn't want to. That's when something inside me shifted. I'm not usually a vengeful person. I've spent 8 years as a single mom trying to teach my son kindness, empathy, the importance of being the bigger person. I volunteer at his school. I volunteer at the community center. I prided myself on being someone who rises above drama and keeps the peace. But this wasn't about drama. This was about my child's fundamental belief in his own worth. Something had been bothering me for months, little comments Derek had made that seemed pointless unless you understood the context. When he found out Dad left me the house, for instance. Derek had expected that inheritance. Our father and he had been close in those final years, and everyone had assumed, but Dad had made a different choice. He'd left me the house because he'd known I'd be raising a kid alone, and he'd wanted me to have stability. He'd left Derek his investment portfolio and some cash, which should have been more than enough. Apparently, Derek didn't see it that way. Your dad and I had this whole plan, my mom had mentioned once, carefully, for Derek to eventually flip the house and use the profits for his business. Your father changed his mind at the last minute. Derek was, well, he was disappointed. That was 6 years ago. 6 years of Derek positioning himself as a fun, successful brother while systematically humiliating my son. Making sure everyone at every gathering saw him as the generous one, the thoughtful one, while painting my family as somehow lesser. I thought about all those videos of parenting advice I'd watched, all those articles about emotional abuse and its long-term effects. I thought about my son at 16, at 25, still believing somewhere deep down that he deserved less. And I made a decision that I probably shouldn't have made, one that my therapist would probably say came from a place of pain rather than clarity. I was going to find out exactly what Derek was doing. I was going to document it. And then I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person he really was. I was going to protect my son, even if it meant destroying my brother's carefully constructed image in the process. Hashtag the investigation. The first thing I did was buy a small digital recorder from Amazon. It came in a plain black box, the kind of thing that could slip into a purse or a jacket pocket without anyone noticing. I told myself I was just being careful, just making sure I had evidence before I said anything to anyone else. I needed to be smart about this. I needed to be able to prove what was happening. That felt important. Like it made me the reasonable one. I spent the next 2 weeks obsessively checking my email for delivery updates, and when the recorder finally arrived, I hid it in my nightstand drawer behind some old tax documents. I didn't tell anyone, not my mom, not my best friend Sarah, not my therapist who I'd been seeing every other Wednesday for the past 3 years. I knew what they would say. They would say I was crossing a line. They would say secret recordings weren't how healthy families resolved conflict. They would probably be right. But I wasn't thinking about healthy families. I was thinking about my son's face in that parking lot, asking if something was wrong with him. The next family event was my mom's book club gathering, which Derek always attended because he liked to show off his wine collection and make comments about how people's literary taste had declined. It was the perfect opportunity, casual enough that Derek would be relaxed, family-focused enough that he'd bring my son a gift. He always did. It was like clockwork. I spent the morning before the event in a state of anxious agitation. I kept second-guessing myself. Was I really going to go through with this? Was I really the kind of person who secretly recorded family members? The answer made me uncomfortable, but I did it anyway. I slipped the recorder into the side pocket of my purse and drove to my mom's house with my son singing along to the radio in the backseat, completely unaware that I was about to cross some kind of invisible line. Derek arrived around 6 p.m., right on schedule, with his wife Susan and their kids. He was carrying a small gift bag, purple tissue paper, his signature move, and he made a big show of presenting it to the gathered crowd before handing it to my son. Found this at an estate sale, Derek announced, his voice warm and theatrical. Thought of my favorite nephew. My son smiled nervously and opened the bag. It was an old Transformer toy, the kind from the 1980s, except the metal was corroded and it didn't transform anymore. One of the arms was stuck in place. Cool, my son said quietly. Thanks, Uncle Derek. Derek ruffled his hair in that condescending way that had started to make my skin crawl. You're welcome, buddy. Sometimes the classics are the best, right? I felt my hands clench into fists. The recorder in my purse captured every word, his tone, the fake warmth, the way he positioned himself as thoughtful and generous while handing my child a broken toy in front of 20 people who did nothing but smile. Meanwhile, Marcus had received a new tablet. Not a used one. Not a refurbished one. A brand new iPad Pro with a leather case, still in its original packaging. I excused myself to the bathroom and locked the door, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was working. The recorder was working. I had proof. But something about having the proof made me feel simultaneously vindicated and sick. Over the next week, I couldn't stop thinking about the recording. I listened to it twice, and both times it made me angry all over again. The casual cruelty in Derek's voice. The way he'd set up the whole narrative, found this at an estate sale, like he was being thoughtful and resourceful, when in reality he probably grabbed it from a trash pile or bought it for $2 at a Goodwill. I started making a plan. I would record him again at the next family event. I would get multiple instances of the same behavior, pattern evidence. Then I would, what? Play the recordings at a family dinner? Confront him directly? Tell my mom what I discovered? The more I thought about it, the bigger my fantasy grew. I wasn't just going to protect my son anymore. I was going to expose Derek as the fraud he was. I was going to make sure everyone saw him the way I was starting to see him, bitter, jealous, resentful, using his success as a mask for something much uglier underneath. I was going to ruin him. That thought should have scared me. Maybe it did, a little. But mostly it felt like justice. What I didn't anticipate was that Sarah would notice something was wrong. She called me on a Thursday afternoon while I was at work, between classes at the community college where I teach part-time. Hey, you've been weird lately, she said without preamble. Sarah doesn't do small talk. More weird than usual. What's going on? I'm fine, I said automatically, even though I wasn't. I'd been fine before the recording. Now I was operating in this strange space between righteousness and guilt, planning something I wasn't entirely sure was ethical while convincing myself it was necessary. You're not fine. You declined the last 3 girls' nights, you barely responded to my text about the concert, and when we did see each other at that coffee place, you seemed like you were a million miles away. So what's happening? I looked around my empty classroom, at the chairs stacked neatly against the wall, at the bulletin board where I'd pinned student work. This was supposed to be my sanctuary, a place where I helped people improve themselves, encouraged critical thinking, built confidence. And I was sitting in it, clutching a phone and preparing to dismantle my family. I can't really talk about it right now, I said. Is it about your brother? Sarah asked, and the accuracy of that guess made my stomach drop. Oh my god, it is. What did Derek do? Did he say something to your son again? The fact that she immediately went to that possibility, that Derek doing something to my son was so obvious, so expected, somehow validated everything I'd been feeling. It's complicated, I said. It's always complicated with family, Sarah replied. But Emma, you're starting to scare me a little. You have that tone in your voice. That tone you get right before you do something you're going to regret. How do you know I'm going to regret it? Because I know you. And I know that tone. It's the same one you had in college when you decided to confront that professor who'd plagiarized your research, and you ended up getting into an actual screaming match with the department head. That was different. How is it different? I didn't answer. The truth was, I wasn't entirely sure anymore. I knew what Derek was doing was wrong, the humiliation, the deliberate cruelty, the systematic undermining of my son's self-worth. But I also knew that what I was doing, the secret recordings, the fantasy about public exposure, the joy I was taking in planning his downfall, was maybe not entirely right either. Can we talk about this in person? Sarah asked gently. Not on the phone. Face to face. This weekend? I told her yes, even though I had no intention of following through. Because the truth was, I didn't want advice. I didn't want perspective. I wanted validation for what I was already determined to do. And I was about to get it, whether it was good for anyone or not. Chunk 3. The weekend came too fast. Sarah had suggested we meet at the coffee place downtown, the one with the good pastries and a corner booth where we'd been having conversations since we were 23 years old. I almost canceled twice. By Saturday morning, I typed out 3 different text messages explaining why I couldn't make it, but I deleted them all because I knew Sarah would just show up at my house anyway. That's what she does. That's what best friends do, and despite everything I was currently hiding from her, I still owed her that much. I sat across from her at 10 a.m. with a latte I wasn't going to drink, watching her tear apart a croissant with the kind of methodical focus she usually reserved for things that actually mattered. So, she said, not looking at me. Are you going to tell me, or do I have to guess? There's not much to tell, I started, but Sarah held up a hand. Emma. Please. I've known you for 11 years. I watched you pretend to be fine after your dad died. I watched you date that guy who was emotionally unavailable for 3 years and convince yourself it was romantic rather than exhausting. I know what you look like when you're lying to yourself, and right now you look like that times 1,000. I wrapped my hands around the latte mug, using the warmth as an anchor. Through the coffee shop window, I could see people walking past, normal people living normal lives, not secretly recording their family members or planning elaborate revenge schemes. The thought made me feel dizzy. Derek's been giving my son terrible gifts, I said finally. On purpose. To humiliate him. Sarah set down her croissant. Okay. Go on. Not just bad gifts. Like, deliberately cruel gifts. Broken toys. Expired candy that he's probably picked out of dumpsters. Meanwhile, he's getting his own kids brand new electronics. And he's been doing it at family events where everyone can see it, but nobody notices or says anything because he's such a good performer. He makes it look generous and thoughtful while he's actually just psychologically abusing your child, Sarah finished quietly. The words, said out loud by someone else, hit differently. When I'd been thinking them alone in my house at night, they had felt justified, even clinical. But hearing them from Sarah, with her concerned eyes and her careful tone, made them sound more serious. More damning. More like proof that I wasn't just upset, I was right to be upset. Yes, I said. How long has this been happening? I'm not sure. Months? Longer? I didn't really notice until my son asked me if something was wrong with him. If he was less deserving of nice things because he was less liked or something. That's when I trailed off. Sarah was very still. That's when you what? I couldn't tell her about the recorder. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I confronted it. I started paying attention. And now I see it everywhere. Did you talk to Derek? How? What would I say? Hey, I noticed you're being cruel to my son, can you stop? He'd just deny it. He's too smart to ever admit to something like that. He'd gaslight me into thinking I was being oversensitive or looking for drama. So what are you going to do? The question hung between us. Sarah was watching me very carefully now, her croissant forgotten on her plate. She had that expression, the one that meant she was trying to read me, trying to figure out how far down the rabbit hole I'd already gone. I don't know yet, I lied. Emma. I'm thinking about it. Thinking about what, specifically? Because I need you to be very honest with me right now. Are you thinking about cutting contact? About setting boundaries? About going to family therapy? Or are you thinking about something else? The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm. I could feel sweat gathering at the base of my neck. Why are you asking like that? Because you have that look. That determined look. And the last time you had that look, you spent 6 months documenting every piece of evidence of plagiarism from Professor Mitchell, and then you went to the department head and basically declared war on him. And yes, you were right, he had plagiarized your work. You were completely justified in being angry. But you didn't handle it well, Emma. You made it bigger and messier than it needed to be, and you ended up looking unstable instead of looking like a victim. This is different, I said. How? Because it's my son. Because it's not about academic integrity, it's about a child's emotional well-being. It's about protecting him. I know, Sarah said gently. But Emma, I'm worried about how you're protecting him. I'm worried that you're not just defending him, you're preparing for war. And I'm worried that war is going to hurt you more than it hurts Derek. I thought about the recorder in my nightstand. I thought about the second family event coming up next month, my mom's birthday dinner. I thought about how I could position the recorder differently, angle it better, maybe get Derek on video this time instead of just audio. What if he's actually broke? I asked suddenly. What if all of this, the expensive gifts for his kids, the wine collection, the comments about being successful, what if it's all a cover? Sarah frowned. Where is this coming from? I've been thinking about it. Derek's always been resentful about Dad's will. The house going to me instead of him. What if he's been living beyond his means trying to prove something? What if he's secretly jealous of me, and this whole thing with my son is actually about getting back at me? That's possible, Sarah said carefully. But Emma, even if that's true, does it matter? Even if you're right about all of it, even if Derek is broken bitter and has been deliberately cruel to your son out of jealousy, what are you actually going to do about it? Make sure everyone knows what he's really like. And how would you do that? I didn't answer. Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying my face like she was trying to memorize something. You're scaring me, she said quietly. Not because of Derek. Because of you. Because I can feel how angry you are, and I can feel how certain you are that you're right, and I recognize that combination in you from before. And I'm scared that you're about to do something that feels necessary and justified to you right now, but that you're going to regret it for years. Maybe some things deserve to be exposed, I said. Maybe they do, Sarah agreed. But not like this. Not in secret. Not with whatever plan you're clearly forming in your head right now. I picked up my latte and finally took a sip. It was cold. #chunk4. Sarah didn't let it go. Of course she didn't. She texted me that afternoon, we need to talk about this more. Not coffee, in person at your house. Tonight. I'm bringing dinner. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her that I had everything under control, that she was overreacting, that this was between me and Derek and she needed to stay out of it. But that's not how Sarah and I worked. We didn't do that avoidance thing. We did confrontation, messy and honest and usually followed by reconciliation and wine. She arrived at 6 with Thai food and a worried expression that didn't fade even when Mason came running out to hug her. I watched her hug him back, really hug him, and felt something crack inside my chest. He was so small. He was so trusting. He had no idea that his mother was planning some kind of elaborate exposure of his uncle, or that she'd been secretly recording family events, or that the reason she'd been so distant lately was because she was consumed with rage that had nowhere to go. After Mason was in bed, after Sarah had helped me with bath time and stories and the whole routine in a way that made me feel like she was silently reminding me of who I was supposed to be, we sat at my kitchen table with the Thai food between us and a bottle of wine I'd opened before she even arrived. I'm going to say something, Sarah said, and I need you to not get defensive. Can you do that? Probably not, I said. But go ahead. You're angry about more than Derek giving your son cheap gifts. I opened my mouth to argue, but she held up a hand. You're angry about the inheritance. You know why Derek resents you, and part of you resents him back for the resentment. And now you have this legitimate reason to be furious with him, this thing he's actually doing to your son, and it's mixing with all the other stuff. The stuff about your dad, about fairness, about Derek always thinking he deserved more than you. And you're making this into something bigger than it is. He's psychologically abusing my son, I said quietly. I'm not making that up. I know you're not. But Emma, listen to me, there's a difference between protecting your child and using your child's pain as justification for something you want to do anyway. The words hit like a slap. That's not fair. Isn't it? Sarah leaned forward. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you want to humiliate Derek the way he's been humiliating your son. You want to expose him. You want to prove that he's not as successful as he pretends to be, that he's actually jealous and broke and petty. And yes, maybe all of that is true. But is that really about protecting Mason, or is it about winning? I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because if I was honest, and Sarah had always demanded honesty, even when it hurt, I didn't know anymore. I couldn't separate my legitimate anger at Derek's cruelty from my own desire to see him suffer the way he'd made my son suffer. The two things had become tangled together so tightly that I couldn't pull them apart. Talk to him, Sarah said. Actually talk to him. Not as an adversary. As his sister. Tell him what you've observed. Give him a chance to explain himself or to stop. And if he doesn't, if he denies it or doubles down, then you go to your mom. You tell her what's happening. You set a boundary. You protect your son by keeping Derek at a distance. But you don't do whatever it is you're planning to do. And if that doesn't work? I asked. Then at least you'll have tried the right way. You'll be able to live with yourself. After Sarah left, after I'd walked her to her car and she'd made me promise I'd think about what she'd said, I went upstairs and looked at my son sleeping in his bed. He was curled on his side, his favorite stuffed animal tucked under his arm, his face relaxed in a way it never was when he was awake anymore. When had his expression become so guarded? When had he started looking worried all the time? The recorder was still in my nightstand. I took it out and held it in my hand, feeling its weight. Such a small thing. Such a small piece of plastic and wire that was supposed to solve everything, that was supposed to prove I was right and Derek was wrong, that was supposed to make everything okay. But it wouldn't. Even if I got Derek on tape, even if I exposed everything, it wouldn't undo the damage he'd already done. It wouldn't make Mason believe he was worthy of nice things. It wouldn't make my son trust that the adults in his life had his back. I deleted the recordings. I did it sitting on my bed at midnight, going through the files and hitting delete on each one. The audio from the last birthday party. The clip from the barbecue. The shorter file from the family lunch. Gone. All of it gone. And when they were deleted, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. The problem was that deleting the recordings didn't change the fact that Derek was still cruel. That my son was still hurt. That the next family event was still coming up, and Derek would still be there with his subtle insults and his cutting gifts, performing his role as the charming, successful uncle while my son watched and internalized the message that he didn't deserve better. Sarah had said to talk to him. To give him a chance to explain. But what if talking didn't work? What if Derek denied everything and gaslit me into feeling like I was overreacting? What if I confronted him and he just got better at hiding it? And more importantly, if I talked to Derek, if I set boundaries, if I did everything the right way, would my son ever believe that I was actually on his side? Or would he wonder why I waited so long? Why I hadn't protected him sooner? I thought about my dad. About how he'd left me the house, and how Derek had spent years being angry about it. I'd never really confronted him about it. I'd just accepted his resentment as something that was his to feel, his problem to manage. Had I enabled this? Had my silence, my staying above it, my refusal to engage in family drama, actually made things worse? My phone buzzed. A text from my mom. Your brother wants to know if we're still doing my birthday dinner next month. He said he'd like to help with planning. Isn't that sweet? I stared at the text. Derek. Offering to help plan. Inserting himself further into family events where he could continue doing whatever this was to my son. Sarah had said don't do it. Don't do whatever you're planning. But she'd also made me promise to think about what she'd said. And I was thinking that maybe there was a third option. Something between secret recordings and quiet confrontation. Something that would protect my son without destroying myself in the process. I just had to figure out what that was. And I had 4 weeks to do it. #Chunk 5. The decision to delete the recordings felt like crossing a threshold I couldn't uncross. I'd spent so long in a state of controlled rage, everything compartmentalized and justified, that letting it go felt like losing my grip on something essential. But the lighter I felt afterward, that was worse somehow. It meant admitting that Sarah was right. That I'd been using my son's pain as fuel for my own agenda. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in bed running through scenarios, rehearsing conversations with Derek that never happened the way I planned them. By 3 a.m., I convinced myself that confronting him directly was a terrible idea. By 4 a.m., I decided it was the only idea. By 5 a.m., I just felt sick. Mason woke up cranky, which wasn't unusual, but I kept catching him watching me with this pinched expression. Like he could sense the war happening in my head and was trying to figure out which side to pick. I made him pancakes and asked about his day at school like everything was normal, but my voice sounded thin even to my own ears. Mom, why are you sad? He asked, syrup on his chin. I'm not sad, buddy. Just tired. You look sad. You look like how I feel after Uncle Derek gives me presents. The pancake I'd taken a bite of turned to ash in my mouth. He just casually connected his emotional state to Derek's gifts, made the association so simple and direct that I couldn't pretend it was anything other than damage. Real damage. The kind that compounds if you don't stop it. Mason, do you not like it when Uncle Derek gives you presents? He shrugged, which 8-year-olds do when they're trying not to cry. His presents are always broken or gross. Mommy, why does he give me broken things when he gives Katie and Emma new stuff? I wanted to scream. I wanted to call Derek right then and tell him exactly what I thought of him. I wanted to walk into his house and demand answers. Instead, I pulled Mason onto my lap and held him while he didn't cry, and I told him that sometimes grown-ups did bad things that weren't his fault, that him being worthy of nice things had nothing to do with whether other people recognized that. It was hollow. We both knew it was hollow. The following Monday, I did something that surprised myself. I called Derek and asked him to meet for coffee. Neutral territory. Just us. No recording device, no hidden agenda, no plan beyond listening. He agreed immediately, which was its own kind of red flag. Derek never agreed to things easily. He usually had to negotiate, to make you feel like you were inconveniencing him. This eagerness felt calculated, like he'd been waiting for me to reach out. We met at a place halfway between our houses, a mediocre coffee shop that smelled like burnt espresso and humidity. Derek was already there, sitting at a corner table with an oat milk latte and the expression of someone about to close a business deal he was very confident about. Hey, Em, he said, standing to hug me. The hug was warm. The hug was the problem. It was so easy to hug Derek when you didn't think about what he was doing to your kid. Everything okay? You sounded weird on the phone. I sat down and ordered a coffee. I didn't want just to have something to do with my hands. I want to talk to you about the gifts you've been giving Mason, I said. Derek's face didn't change. That was the second red flag. What about them? They're broken. They're damaged. They're insulting, Derek, and I need to know why. He took a long sip of his coffee and smiled. Not a genuine smile. The smile of someone about to execute a move he'd been planning for a while. Mason's been complaining about his gifts? My son doesn't complain. My son internalizes things. He thinks it's because he's not worthy of nice presents. He thinks it's because something is wrong with him. Nothing's wrong with him, Derek said smoothly. He's just going through a phase where he's ungrateful. Kids are like that sometimes. Emma and Katie have learned to appreciate what they get, but Mason's still young. He'll figure it out. The coffee arrived. I didn't touch it. That's not going to work, I said. The gaslighting. I'm not going to let you reframe this as Mason being the problem. Derek leaned back in his chair. He looked almost impressed. You know what? You're right. I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. He held his hands up in surrender. Look, I've been dealing with some stuff. Work has been a nightmare, and honestly, I've been envious of you. There, I said it. You've always had it so easy. You get the house, you get to play single mom like it's some kind of badge of honor. Everyone feels sorry for you. Meanwhile, I'm out here actually building something, and nobody cares. So yeah, maybe I've been a little harsh with Mason. Maybe I was projecting my own stuff onto him. The confession disarmed me completely. This wasn't what I prepared for. I prepared for denial, anger, dismissal. Not this. Not Derek calmly admitting to his resentment like we were in some kind of therapeutic dialogue. So you'll stop, I said. Of course I'll stop. I don't want to hurt the kid. I was just, I don't know, trying to prove something to myself, I guess. Trying to prove that I was the successful one. He laughed, but it sounded tired. Which is stupid because clearly I'm not. Katie's therapist costs more than my car payment, and I'm eating ramen 3 times a week. So yeah, I've been a petty asshole to your 8-year-old son. I'm sorry. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt validated. Instead, I felt this creeping sense of dread, like I'd just stepped into a trap I couldn't see the edges of yet. Derek. You don't have to say anything, he said. I get it. You're worried I'm going to keep doing it, that this is just me trying to manipulate you. But here's the thing, I can't afford to keep doing it. I literally can't. Katie's private school, Emma's soccer, dental work, Katie's therapy, all of it. Do you know how close I am to filing for bankruptcy? My ex-wife is about to file for full custody because I can't keep up with child support. The successful uncle act? That's all it's ever been, Em. An act. And I can't even afford to keep up with that anymore. He said it all with this hollow laugh, like he was confessing to his own irrelevance, and I realized that Sarah had been wrong about one thing. It wasn't just about Derek's resentment toward me. It was about Derek's resentment toward everything. Toward his life, his choices, his inability to be the person he'd convinced everyone he was. What do you want from me? I asked. Nothing, Derek said. I just wanted you to know the truth. I wanted you to know that when I told Katie and Emma they were getting real gifts while Mason got the stuff from the dollar store clearance bin, I was being an asshole, but I was being an asshole out of necessity, not cruelty. There's a difference. Was there, though? I wasn't sure anymore. I'll talk to Mom about my birthday dinner, he continued. I'll back out gracefully. That way you won't have to worry about me embarrassing myself or hurting Mason. Derek. I should go, he said, checking his watch like he had somewhere to be. But thanks for giving me the chance to explain. Really. It matters. He left before I could respond, leaving me alone with 2 cold coffees and the uncomfortable realization that I'd walked into this confrontation expecting one kind of monster and found something far more complicated instead. #chunk6. I sat in that coffee shop for another 20 minutes after Derek left, staring at the condensation on my untouched cup and trying to figure out what had just happened. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A barista steamed milk. A couple at the next table laughed about something on someone's phone. The world continued its ordinary rotation while I attempted to reconcile the brother I'd come prepared to destroy with the one who just confessed to financial ruin. The problem was that Derek's confession didn't actually solve anything. It just complicated it. When I got home, Mason was at his after-school program until 5. I had 90 minutes to myself, which I spent pacing the kitchen and going through my phone. I brought the recording device. I brought it in my purse, ready to capture whatever Derek said, ready to have concrete proof of his abuse. The thing was still there, sitting in the bottom of my bag next to a gum wrapper and a receipt from the grocery store. I'd never turned it on. I called Sarah. How'd it go? She asked immediately, like she'd been waiting by the phone. He admitted to it. To everything. He said he was being petty because he's jealous, because he's actually broke and can't maintain his image, and he said he'd stop. He said he'd back out of his birthday dinner to spare us the embarrassment. There was a long pause. That's good, right? Is it? I asked. Or is it just a more sophisticated manipulation? Because now instead of being the asshole brother who deliberately hurts children, he's the struggling brother who made mistakes, and I'm supposed to feel sympathetic about it. And I do feel sympathetic about it, which is the problem. It's hard to hate someone when you know they're drowning. You don't have to hate him, Sarah said carefully. You just have to protect Mason. But that's the thing, he said he'd stop. He admitted he was being cruel, and he said he'd stop. So either I take him at his word, or I assume everything is a lie and move forward like I'm going to war with my brother. And I'm exhausted, Sarah. I'm so exhausted. You're also protecting yourself, she said. You're second-guessing your gut because guilt is easier than anger. Maybe she was right. Probably she was right. Sarah had always been good at cutting through my bullshit, which is why I both loved and resented her for it. When Mason came home, I picked him up and we went through our usual routine, snack, homework, playing with his Legos while I made dinner. He seemed lighter somehow, less weighted down by something invisible. He didn't mention Derek or presents or anything heavy. He just talked about his friend Jason and how they built a fort in the reading corner and Mrs. Patterson had made them take it down because it was a fire hazard, which was totally unfair because they weren't actually using fire. I laughed and agreed it was unfair, and I watched my son's face and tried to figure out when I'd started making decisions based on what made my life easier rather than what was actually right. The next morning, Derek texted, "Hey, told Mom I can't make the dinner. Family stuff. Hope you guys can still celebrate though. Miss you." The text was perfectly pitched. Apologetic without being pathetic. Graceful about bowing out. Inclusive enough that I'd look like a monster if I didn't accept it at face value. I didn't respond. Instead, I called my mother. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, which was how she always answered the phone with me, like I caught her in the middle of something important and she was trying not to let me know it. "Is everything okay? I need to talk to you about Derek." The line shifted. I could practically hear her straightening up. "What about him?" "He's been giving Mason damaged gifts. Deliberately. While giving his own daughters expensive presents. He's been humiliating my son at family gatherings, and when I confronted him about it, he admitted it was because he's jealous of me. Of the house. Of Dad's will." My mother was quiet for a long time. "That doesn't sound like Derek." "That's exactly what Derek would count on," I said. "That's the whole point. He's built this image as a successful, generous uncle, and everyone believes it because he makes you all want to believe it. But underneath that, he's been deliberately hurting an 8-year-old child because he's angry at me. Emily, that's a very serious accusation." "It's not an accusation." He admitted it. He admitted to being jealous. That doesn't mean he was deliberately cruel to Mason. That's a leap. The fury that bloomed in my chest was immediate and pure. "Mom, he gave my son a broken toy and expired candy while he gave his daughters real gifts. That's not ambiguous. That's not open to interpretation. That's abuse." "I don't think that word applies here," my mother said, and I could hear the careful distance in her voice, the same tone she'd used when my father was still alive and she was trying to explain to me why we couldn't talk about his infidelities, why we all had to just get along for the sake of the family. "Derek's going through a hard time, and yes, he made mistakes, but I don't think we need to make this into some kind of drama. It already is drama, Mom. It's drama happening to my son. He thinks it's because something is wrong with him. I'm sure that's not true. It is true. He told me. He asked me why Uncle Derek gives him broken things." I could hear the calculation happening on the other end of the line. My mother was figuring out the best way to diffuse this, the way she'd spent 40 years figuring out how to keep the family narrative intact, how to sand down the sharp edges of reality until everything fit neatly into the story she'd chosen to believe. "I'll talk to Derek," she finally said. "I'm sure he'll be more thoughtful going forward. He said he's backing out of his birthday dinner." "Yes, he mentioned something about that. I think it's probably for the best. Let things settle down. Let things settle down. Translation, let me forget this happened. Let Derek's reputation remain intact. Let my son continue to believe he's somehow lesser. Mom. I really do have to go, sweetie. I have bridge in 20 minutes. We'll talk soon, okay? Give Mason my love." She hung up before I could respond. I sat on my bed in the quiet house and thought about how I'd walked into that coffee shop prepared to blow Derek's life open, prepared to destroy his image, prepared to protect my son at any cost. And then Derek had destroyed his own image for me, had handed me his vulnerability on a plate, and I'd somehow still lost. Because the real problem had never been Derek. Derek was just a symptom. The real problem was a family that prioritized protecting its image over protecting its children, and I'd been raised inside that system for 34 years. I'd internalized it. I'd built my own life around it. And now I had to figure out how to break that cycle for Mason while still living within a family that would fight me every step of the way. #Chunk7. The problem with realizing you've internalized dysfunction is that you can't unrealize it. It sits there in your consciousness like a stain that won't come out, and every time you think you've moved past it, you catch yourself doing the exact same thing, prioritizing peace over honesty, comfort over truth, the family image over your own child's well-being. I spent the next week in a strange liminal space. Derek wasn't coming to the birthday dinner. My mother had assured me that things would settle down. Mason was acting normal, which meant I'd somehow protected him without actually addressing anything. Everything looked fine from the outside, and that was the problem. I'd learned to mistake the appearance of resolution for actual resolution. On Thursday, Sarah came over with wine and the expression of someone who'd been thinking about this as much as I had. "Have you talked to Derek since the text?" she asked, settling into my couch like she was preparing for a long conversation. "No." I told myself I'd give him space. Let things settle. I winced at my own words, hearing my mother in them. But really, I've just been avoiding it. Because you feel guilty. Because I feel everything, I corrected. Guilty, angry, confused, relieved. I feel like I won and lost at the same time. I feel like my mother completely invalidated what happened to my son, and I feel like maybe she had a point, which is the worst feeling of all. Sarah poured wine into the glass she brought with her because we both knew I didn't have any clean ones. Walk me through what you're actually worried about. That Derek will backslide. That he'll go to the next family thing and be perfectly charming, and in 6 months he'll start giving Mason bad gifts again, just in a more subtle way. That my mother will pretend this never happened. That Mason will internalize the message that it's easier to just accept mistreatment than to push back against it. I paused. That I'll accept that too. Okay, so what's stopping you from actually addressing it? Because he's already broken. Because he admitted everything. Because if I push harder, I'm the one being cruel to a struggling man instead of the one protecting my son. Sarah set down her wine. Emily, can I say something that might be harsh? Please. You're letting him control the narrative again, just in a different direction. Before, he was the successful uncle and you were the resentful sister. Now he's the broken, remorseful mess, and you're the compassionate person who's gracefully accepting his contrition. Either way, you're not actually protecting Mason. You're managing Derek's reputation and your own feelings about it. The words hit like cold water. So what am I supposed to do? I can't just keep punishing him forever. You're not punishing him by having boundaries. But you can't have real boundaries without real consequences. He said he'd stop. Great. But what does that actually look like? What does he have to do to prove that he means it? And what happens if he doesn't? I hadn't thought that far ahead. I'd been so focused on the confession and the retreat and the relief of not having to use that recording device that I hadn't actually constructed anything resembling a functional plan. You also need to talk to your son, Sarah continued. Not about Derek necessarily, but about what happened. You need him to understand that none of it was about him. That his uncle was being unkind, and that's on Derek, not on Mason. He hasn't asked about it again. Exactly. Which means he's either processed it or he's buried it, and if it's the latter, you're just creating a time bomb. After Sarah left, I sat in the kitchen with her words circling in my head. She was right, obviously. She'd been right about my mother too, about me second-guessing my gut, about guilt being easier than anger. But knowing she was right and knowing what to actually do about it were two completely different things. The next morning, I texted Derek, we need to actually talk about this. Not a text. In person. His response came back almost immediately, I don't want to make things harder for you. Which was exactly what I'd been afraid of. He'd already positioned himself as the one being considerate, the one being careful not to burden me. If I pushed for a conversation, I was the one being difficult. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I picked Mason up from school and took him to the park. He climbed on the monkey bars while I sat on a bench and watched him move through the world with a kind of unself-conscious confidence that I desperately wanted to protect. When he got bored with the bars, he came and sat next to me, sweating and happy in the way 8-year-olds get. Mason, I want to talk to you about something, I said. He immediately looked worried. Am I in trouble? No, baby. You're not in trouble. I want to talk about presents. And Uncle Derek. He went very still beside me. Okay. You remember when you asked me why Uncle Derek gave you broken things? And you thought maybe it was because something was wrong with you? He nodded, not meeting my eyes. I want you to know that there's nothing wrong with you. Nothing. Uncle Derek was being unkind because he was feeling sad and angry about things that have nothing to do with you. But that doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make it your fault. And you didn't have to just accept it and pretend it was fine. You were right to ask me about it. Is Uncle Derek still going to give me broken presents? He asked quietly. I'm going to make sure he doesn't. And if he tries, we're going to talk about it together. Okay? You never have to pretend something is fine when it isn't. He leaned against me, and I put my arm around him and felt the weight of him, the solidity of him, the absolute certainty that I would burn the world down before I let it convince him he was less deserving of kindness. That evening, I called Derek. He picked up on the third ring, and I could hear the caution in his voice before he even spoke. Hi, he said carefully. I need you to listen to me without defending yourself. Can you do that? Emily. Can you? A pause. Okay. What you did to Mason wasn't just about being petty or jealous. It was about deliberately making my child believe he wasn't worthy of the same care you give your own children. That's abuse. I know you're struggling, and I know you're sorry, but sorry isn't enough. You need to actually repair the damage. How? He asked, and there was genuine desperation in that single word. I don't know yet, I admitted. But we're going to figure it out together, and it's not going to be comfortable. For either of us. Are you willing to do that? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Yes, he finally said. Yes, I'll do that. I hung up feeling like I'd finally taken the first actual step towards something real. #Chunk8, the path forward. The family dinner was scheduled for 3 weeks later. My mother had decided it was time to move past all this negativity, which was her way of saying she wanted everyone to pretend nothing had happened. I'd made it clear to her that Derek's absence at Mason's birthday was non-negotiable, and this time, I didn't soften the message with apologies or explanations. When she pushed back, I simply repeated myself, Derek won't be there. She didn't like it, but she also didn't argue further, which told me she understood I meant it. What surprised me was that Derek didn't ask to come. Instead, he'd spent the past 3 weeks actually doing the work, therapy sessions with a psychologist who specialized in family trauma, conversations with me about what meaningful repair looked like, and most importantly, time with a therapist specifically trained in helping him understand the roots of his resentment. I didn't need him to be fixed. I needed him to genuinely try, and that's what he was doing. He'd also asked Mason if he could take him to lunch, just the two of them. I was terrified. Every protective instinct in my body screamed not to let my son out of my sight with the person who'd hurt him, but Sarah had reminded me that healing required risk. He needs to know his uncle can be different, she'd said. And Derek needs to be trusted with the opportunity to show he's serious about change. I drove him to a casual restaurant and sat in my car, refreshing my email with white-knuckle intensity, trying not to catastrophize. 45 minutes later, Derek walked Mason back out. My son was grinning, actually grinning, and carrying a bag. When he got in the car, he immediately pulled out a new Lego set, something he'd been wanting but I hadn't bought because it was expensive. Uncle Derek said he bought it because I deserve good things, Mason reported matter-of-factly. And he said he's sorry for the broken presents. He said it wasn't my fault. I looked at Derek through the car window. He met my eyes and gave a small nod, something like humility in his expression. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something. The dinner itself was strange and strained. My mother had invited extended family, which I suspect was her way of ensuring civility. Derek's absence was the elephant in the room, the question no one asked but everyone wondered about. I let it sit unanswered. There was no dramatic revelation, no moment where I pulled everyone aside and explained the situation. That wasn't about them. It was about Mason. Midway through the meal, my aunt pulled me aside. Is everything okay with Derek? Your mother seems upset about something. I considered how much to share. Derek was being unkind to Mason. We're working through it. She nodded slowly, processing. Your mother mentioned something about gifts? Yes. Deliberately hurtful gifts, over a period of time. It was psychological abuse, even if it wasn't intentional on Derek's part. My aunt's face shifted. Oh my God. I didn't realize, she paused. Actually, I did notice he treated your son differently, but I told myself I was imagining it. This was the conversation I'd been avoiding, the acknowledgement that other people had seen it happening and hadn't said anything. I didn't blame my aunt. I blamed myself, for the longest time, for not forcing that conversation sooner. You're not responsible, I told her, and I meant it. But now you know. And now you can make different choices. Over the following months, things shifted in ways both visible and invisible. Derek continued therapy. Mason started opening up more about his feelings, often bringing up specific moments when he'd felt hurt or confused, and I got to tell him again and again that his feelings were valid, that his instinct to question something that didn't feel right was correct, that trusting himself mattered more than keeping peace. My mother never fully acknowledged what happened. She was incapable of it. Her entire worldview was built on the idea that family conflict should be managed quietly, that airing grievances was a betrayal of family loyalty. But she also stopped pressuring me to include Derek in everything, and when I set boundaries, she respected them. The recording device I bought sat in my desk drawer and used. Some part of me had needed to know I had that option, that I could document the truth if I needed to. But in the end, the truth was powerful enough on its own. 6 months after the initial confrontation, Derek asked if he could take Mason to a baseball game. I said yes. When they came back, Mason was sunburned and happy and talking about hot dogs and the way Uncle Derek had bought him a souvenir without asking first, just because he wanted to. That night, after Mason was asleep, Derek called. I want you to know something, he said. I'm not doing this because I'm trying to get back to where we were. I'm doing it because I genuinely want to be better. For Mason, but also for me. I spent so long resenting you and being angry about the house and feeling like the world wasn't fair, and it made me into someone I don't recognize. Someone cruel to a kid who never did anything to me. I know, I said. I'm starting to repair things with my own kids too. They know their dad was being unfair. It's been hard having them see that about me. That's good, I said, and I meant it. That's what real change looks like. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen and thought about all the moments that had led to this point. The birthday party where Mason asked why his present was broken. The recording device I'd held in my hand like a weapon. The text Derek had sent in the middle of the night. My mother's dismissal. Sarah's unflinching honesty. I thought about the person I'd been before, the one who second-guessed her gut, who prioritized everyone else's comfort over her son's well-being, who'd inherited her mother's belief that sacrifice was the highest form of love. That person was still in me, probably would be forever. But she was quieter now. Mason was in the other room, sleeping deeply, secure in the knowledge that his mother saw him clearly and would protect him fiercely. That was enough. That was everything. The road ahead wouldn't be perfect. Derek would probably slip sometimes. My mother would probably revert to her old patterns. But I'd learned something fundamental about myself. I could hold boundaries without needing to burn everything down. I could demand change without being cruel. I could protect my son without becoming someone unrecognizable. And maybe that was the real victory, not the confrontation or the revenge or the dramatic exposure, but the simple, quiet knowledge that I finally trusted myself enough to do what was right, regardless of what anyone else thought.